Hello, and welcome to our humble podcast with me, Mark, and my associate, Steve. What we do is we discuss items which Steve has looked through the media this week and try and make sense of them and analyse them. You may or may not agree with us. We're always interested in hearing what you have to think. So, over to Steve.
Hi, people. So, before we get underway with this week's episode, a couple of things to correct from last week. One is I said that the representative or the leader of the Labour Party, when I mentioned it in the UK, was a chap called David Miliband, when it wasn't at all. It was his brother, Ed Miliband. David Miliband is the shorter, smarter guy who went off to the US and, I don't know, working with some foundation or something or other. The other thing is Greta Thunberg. I mentioned that it was her that predicted 5 years life term for the planet if we didn't get rid of carbon energy. And it was only after chatting to somebody on Facebook that it clicked. It clicked that it wasn't her. It was her that transmitted somebody else's prediction. And this person is a guy called James Anderson, and he's a professor of atmospheric chemistry at Harvard University, and he made this prediction in 2018. And the anniversary of his prediction was actually yesterday and not last week. But even so, these are the quality of experts, of climate change experts that the activists are using. So much so that yesterday I was watching an interview of a climate activist, and he gave another 20 years life prediction of the planet, which is nice of him, because Al Gore, he gave 20 years. Al Gore, he made $300 million with his prediction, which was nice. He complained that there would be sea level rises, catastrophic, that would inundate New York City. In the meantime, he bought an $8 million beachfront house, as did Barack Obama, who also supports climate change. But that's something that can be held over for next week, because there are some aspects of the climate change industry that are interesting. It isn't saving the planet. It isn't saving the planet. But that's something else that we can discuss next week. What we got this week, I was reading and watching two reports, I think, about the same subject in Ukraine. But one was a report from the West, and the other was a report from the East. The report from the West was that the Ukrainian soldiers were deliberately sabotaging their armored vehicles so that they didn't have to go into battle. Right? They'd do they'd pull a wire here, loosen the bolt there, so that they didn't have to take the armored vehicle into battle and die. A lot of Ukrainian soldiers are dying. On the eastern side, they're saying that the weapons and material being sent to Ukraine is all substandard. It's all really old. You know, you got trucks with flat batteries and tires are all worn, and you know they just can't cope with the terrain. And this was supported by a video which showed some Russians approaching a tank, a Ukrainian tank, which was obviously, the tank was not Ukrainian, but it's on the Ukrainian side. And it looked like the tank had shed a track, but the motor was still running. And so I think that, you know, the Ukrainian soldiers inside the tank thought, oops, we're sitting ducks here. You know, the tank had shed a track, and so they just abandoned didn't even turn the engine off of the tank. They just took up and left and fled. And so there's it could be a bit of truth in both of the reports. Either way, the Ukrainians are even admitting now that their counteroffensive is not working out as they had hoped. There are a lot of casualties and deaths. I made the mistake of watching a video of a Russian helicopter taking out some Ukrainian tanks, you know, and I said to myself, this just looks like a video game, you know, when really I was looking at it back to front. It's that video games are looking like real life war situations. The only difference is that in the real life war situation, there's 5 blokes in a tank that get killed. You know, in a video game, you just kill the tank and it's done. You know, and this I'm sure heightens the threshold of shock. You know, if you see something on the telly, if you saw something on the TV 20 years ago, 30 years ago, that was shocking, these days, it just isn't shocking anymore because of the exposure you've had from the technology and from information you've received from your environment. Let's say it like that. The world has been covered by one news story this week, which is about the submersible going down to see the Titanic, or trying to see the Titanic. And by gum, have the press, the British press, delve deep, interviewing people and interviewing aspects and reporting aspects of the project to go and see the Titanic in this submersible. When the truth of the matter is, it's just 5 people going down to see a shipwreck. But for all intents and purposes, it appears, I'm not saying it is, it appears they were in a substandard craft. And when you are down at those depths, I learnt over the last couple of days, the water pressure is so great that you don't, if your craft springs a leak, you implode. You don't explode, you implode. And which is probably why you don't see floaty corpses on the Titanic because the water pressure. It's already imploded everything. As one scientist said this morning, they just turn biomass. People, the bodies, they just turn biomass, and you disappear, which is to me is remarkable. It was a remarkable thing to imagine and to reflect upon, But anyway, back to what's happening in the world. It seems that the US is abandoning Taiwan. The US sent their ships down to Taiwan to try and protect Taiwan. They used to threaten China that if you try to invade Taiwan, there will be problems. And it was a very much a gorilla beating chest appearance that the US wanted to give. Biden, he needed to show that he was macho man, and so he was doing this. Recently, Blinkin went to visit Xi in China, and he came back and he said, "We do not support Taiwan independence," which means that Taiwan is still part of China. Look, if the US does not support Taiwan independence, why send all the battleships down there?
Okay.
Why send all the battleships down there? It's ridiculous, The EU also said this week that closer relations with Taipei are not in their interests. No. Why this change? Why this recent change? I believe is because what the West didn't expect is that the rest of the world basically is following the BRICS nations. I think around about 4 or 5 weeks ago, I said that the BRICS nations could change the whole economic shift of the world, and I think that's happening, principally behind China and Russia. To a certain extent, Brazil, because I think China's worked it out. They're doing the Belt and Road initiative. The EU, which is going bankrupt, by the way, it doesn't have any more money. Is seeing that the Baltic states are receiving money from China to rebuild their infrastructure, are starting to sway and go in the direction of China, because money talks, and I think China has thought this through, and like I said, Brazil will be the source of minerals. Russia will be the source of fuel, of energy, and China will be the source of manufacturing. South Africa needs to sort their internal problems out. But even so, it would be a source for businesses within the BRICS to do construction, and so that the marketplace there in South Africa, as it's underdeveloped, is to develop it using the companies in China, Russia, and the other BRICS nations, And I think the West is beginning to see this, and they didn't expect China and Russia to band together as they have done over the last couple of weeks or a month or so ago, and now the pennies begin to drop, and they have to be on board. They have to be on board, or they get left behind, and the table is turned.
Okay.
What?
Right. Okay.
Just one other thing. What I thought was interesting is that China has struck a deal with Cuba to put a Chinese military base on the island of Cuba, in the country of Cuba. The United States is going ballistic because of this, you know. But then you just have to look at, if the United States is going ballistic because of one army base being close to its borders, you have to think about what Vladimir Putin was going through over the last 20, since the 90s, when the NATO kept on putting their army bases in these countries surrounding Russia. You know, I listened to a speech at 2 o'clock this morning by JFK Jr. The second, the guy who's wanting to become a candidate for presidency in the US. And one of the best speeches I think I've ever heard. And I'll get the link and we can post it on because it's well worth everybody to hear. Everybody, he tells the truth about the past, the present, and his ideals for the future, and it all just falls into place. It all makes sense. It all makes sense. So I think basically that's what I've got for this week. If anything else pops into my head, once we start the discussion proper, so it's back to you.
No. It's interesting hearing it. Yeah, right. I'll break it down. Climate change. Yes, we'll leave for next week. Because yes, well, we've touched on that in previous.
Will we still be here?
Yeah. I think we're safe to say that the planet will still be here for a podcast next week at least. All predictions of demise 5 years ago have been proved otherwise incorrect. Okay, well, obviously it is a big thing, the Ukraine war. As you touched upon it, yes, it is people dying. It's quite interesting when you read. I dare say there's a lot of, well, they say Ukrainians are brave, protecting their homeland. You have to think who the Ukrainians are. They are a mixture, effectively, of nationalist Ukrainians or people identified as Ukrainians and still white Russians, or whatever label. And I hate this labeling. I hate it, but I'm not going to get into this today. But yes, and probably nobody wants to be fighting. It's been quite interesting because I've shown a few Brazilians in some lessons I've been doing in 2017. There's a competition called Battle of Nations, which is where people dress up as medieval knights and go fighting each other as such, pushing each other over and everything. And one of these on the final, I think, was 21 Russian guys versus 21 Ukrainian guys, which was quite interesting, given the context now. And these guys go and just bash and try and push each other over. And I was showing Brazilians this, the irony of it all. This competition has unfortunately had to be ceased at the moment because of obvious, there's real fights going on across Europe at the moment. It's Battle of Nations. It's actually very interesting to watch if you like history and you like combat sports. The two are combined somehow. Anyway, so it's quite interesting watching these, and it was a good friendly dust up. And what's interesting is that, yeah, they're checking each other all right. There's one guy with a Progo on his head, videoing it, and he's checking the guy he's hitting are all right. You know, they speak the same language. They are effectively very similar people. I know, yes, it's not very nice having missiles dropped on you. Yeah, getting back to the counteroffensive, I think I said it, or Steve said it a couple of weeks ago, that for a side that is winning a so-called war, and it is a war, Ukraine having to do an awful lot of counteroffensives, but it could be in restricted areas. We have very limited information, or there probably isn't limited information. We've been told limited information ourselves. I can't believe today's technology that people do not know what's going on so many different levels. Yeah. We're not living in the 1950s Cold War, 60s Cold War era now. We've got so much technology to observe what's going on. Yes, I think there's probably old material being sent to Ukraine, the scrap stuff that's going to be scrapped. That's not new. Brazil bought ships from the UK that were about to be mothballed. That's one incident earlier last year, I think it was. Nobody quite knew what to do with this old Brazilian ship. I think it's from the US, but it's all yeah, sending old stock is not new. When you're talking about tanks, yeah, the track on a tank's, yeah, sprung. The guys are trained how to do it, but they're obviously very scared guys. With all the best will in the world, how well are the Ukrainians trained? What guys are they? They're effectively conscripts. I mean, I don't know what the Russians are. The Russian have quite a big, strong standing army, from what I've understood, always understood. So they're professionals. I don't think any soldier really wants to be in a war situation at all, anywhere. I mean, some love it. Okay, it's their job. These poor guys there are probably fighting people who effectively are the same type of people as them, who probably don't want to be there. This is a high level fight for territory, etc. Remember, a few years ago, the Russians and Ukrainians were quite happy having agreements of how to use ports and everything else. Something went wrong, and I think Steve alluded to it. NATO / EU have been encroaching upon the area. Russia have always been suspicious of the West, possibly not always for bad reasons. It's a shame it's happened. It's a shame it's come to this. As we said a while ago, well, I think we both think that the Russians are being very, very, inverted commas, and I know people don't always understand it when I say this, gentle with Ukraine. Ukraine has still got buildings standing. I don't think there's an idea of mass destruction. I think the Russians would much rather just Ukrainians stop what they're doing and fight and talk. I don't know. I can't get into Putin's mind. I can't get into Zelensky's mind. If either can actually do anything. I imagine Putin has probably still got more control over his own country than Zelensky has now. But yeah, when you were talking about these Russians approaching a tank, I think they did it very cautiously because of booby traps, etc. I mean, the Russians are very capable of it. Remember, when we're talking about the West sending things there, originally the tanks that the Ukrainians had were all Russian supply. That's why they had to have the sea put on the side for the Russians, so they didn't go and do blue on blue fire, or whatever they called it, friendly fire, blue on blue. Yeah, both sides are quite capable of not necessarily following certain guidelines or chivalrous wars. Never have been. You study the history of medieval battles, get back to my original thing. But yeah, I think that, yeah, and as I said, at some point the two sides have got to start talking, in my opinion, because yeah, the body counts are going to get higher and higher in both countries. I think Steve alluded to this JFK Jr. And I think he's more or less saying about that the sides are going to have to start talking. I only glimpsed a couple of things which he said, and the interests of sending. Looking from an American point of view, what relevance, apart from people dying and possible humanitarian issues, what relevance is a war in Ukraine really to the Americans? Overall, I don't know if Steve agrees, disagree. I've only heard briefly what he said, I will admit, because I was trying to listen this morning. And I've heard other Americans say it. And it's not like World War I, World War II, what's it to do with us? This is a localized territorial argument. Does Putin still want influence in the area? Yes, he does. Does the EU want influence in the area? Yes, they do. It is a much wider issue in that respect than Ukraine and Russia. I'm going to say here, I don't think it would develop, this in its own would not develop into a European or global conflict. I think there's a lot of paper talk here. I think you're still talking about Russia. I mean, Putin is still pragmatic. He's the one who has been having drills to remind the world in Moscow what a nuclear war would look like.
I think it won't develop into a world conflict, basically because the West don't have any more arms. The NATO have said that the Europe has less than the least amount of arms you can have to be a member of NATO. The stocks have down so much. You know, the US, they said, no, it was the English that said if we went into a war, we'd have 3 weeks of ammunition, and it's done. The US, who are the head cheerleaders of Ukraine, they must be depleted a humongous amount of arms because they've been sending it all across there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was this JFK you spoke about. I mean, he said, oh, the initial thing was, originally it was to save the Ukraine. The next policy is, oh, we're going to wear the Russian resolve down and the Russian hardware down. Good luck with that. It might not be the highest standard they're using. Even the Russians are probably not the best standards at the moment. What have they got in reserve? I don't know. And I think that's the big unknown. They're not technically.
But the thing is, but I also think that they think, the West thinks that China, up until now, China hasn't fired a single shot.
No.
And if China gets in on the action, they're the only ones that's got the money in terms of arms. They're the only ones that's got the arms, and so nobody's going to be able to retaliate against China.
Yeah, well,
because they just don't have the arms to do it.
Yeah, I mean that's it.
Nor the manpower.
Yeah, well, that's what I've said. That's what I've been saying. The body count's going to go up if I mean, we don't know how good the Chinese military is or isn't. We don't know exactly how good their weapons are or aren't.
A million soldiers, Mark, a lot of soldiers to kill.
Yeah, now
you need a lot of bullets.
I'm going to make this point as well because I started to see this years ago, and I have worked for companies that do, have supplied military. I don't know a lot. I only know what's on their intranet, basically. Even when I was working at it, I think the Ukraine is proving that conventional warfare, tanks are so yesterday. I mean, they're sitting targets. Aircraft carriers are sitting targets. We talk about aircraft carriers now. Any naval guy will tell you an aircraft carrier is probably out of date. All it does, it allows you to get, was a runway with planes to go and do some striking. How effective that is now. I mean, that was useful in Iraq, Afghanistan, Iraq certainly. But again, these are still conventional weapons. Yes, probably having rockets that can, steer themselves and go and attack and all that. This is the future. It always has been, which is quite frightening. But that technology has been around for 50 years. Yeah, at the moment, the world's using up its hardware in Ukraine. Yeah, there's lots of counter things against tanks and everything have been developed, and the tanks have been developed to try and mitigate against the counter things with them. The double, you see the strange things with the cages on top of the tanks. That's because stop the piercing, because a model missile will go through, explode, pierce the top, go through and blow again, take out the crew inside. I remember the Sun newspaper put the video of the Russian tank. Oh, look at this, the turret's gone 100 feet in the air. How many meters that is? 70 meters in the air for resilience. And it's like, but there's 5 guys going up in that as well, 3 to 5 guys. I mean, the body count is high. We don't know on either side what's going on. We don't know how. All we're hearing is counteroffensive. We're starting to say counteroffense. I mean, it would appear the Russians have probably got their objective, more or less, the original objective. Just thinking out about it. I don't know. Again, none of us know. We don't know what's in Putin's mind. I still don't think he wants to take the whole of Ukraine at the moment. But we don't know. It might happen by default. At some point, somebody's got to rebuild Ukraine. Now, I know they're talking about, all these deals have been signed, which means Zelensky has got himself in a bit of a problem. He's not the owner of his own country anymore. People are going to go in. How's he going to pay for the rebuilding?
Yeah, we touched on that a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, and again, it's all coming round by talking about it. All right. The next thing I'm going to bring in is the Titanic sub. That's an interesting subject. A few billionaires get stuck under the water. The amount of sick taste memes that have been floating around really show how much apathy these people had.
Pity they weren't.
Well, had to pay for your own funeral. It's a expensive funeral. And I know it's a sick joke, but that's what it's seen as. It's an unfortunate thing. I mean, one guy took his kid down there, trip of a lifetime. Forget Disneyland this year. We're going to have a look at this. It's a bit of a sick thing because the Titanic is a mass burial site as well, and it's in pieces. Okay, it'll never be raised. A few weeks ago, we were talking about that they have a virtual mapping now. You can go online and have a look. Why does anyone need to actually go down and see it? Yes, I know it's like going to see in a castle or something else, but it's only ever going to be accessible to the few, a bit like Branson's going up into space. I'd love to do that, but what's the reality of me actually ever being able to do it? It is a very, very sad thing. It's loss of life. Yes, they've got to try and bring the sub up while there's opportunity. But I think then people have probably had a very real experience of what the people in the Titanic went through. So they got their wish to have the real world experience. Right. Just moving on, because we're almost out of our self-imposed time. Obviously, Taiwan is a problem. Quite what's happening in the world. Again, I was thinking when Steve was talking, conventional weapons again, ships in the area. What use are they? Other things. I've understood that Taiwan is what they call the hedgehog or porcupine thing now. Porcupine, where it can fire its points. It's I can't remember the term in English or Portuguese.
Needles, I think.
Needles, it can't fire its needle. It can fire its needles, which there's lots of missiles on Taiwan. It could possibly defend itself for a time. Maybe we're coming to peace with China. Maybe there's an acceptance that maybe China could be good partners.
Well, like I said, I don't think it's a case of choosing to become a partner with China.
Hmm.
It's a case of if you don't, you're going to be left behind.
Well, we're probably already there. We know the balance of power is changing. I don't think China are looking to turn the world into one mass version of themselves, because they have internal production problems as well. I don't know. Again, it's a frightening thought. That's up to us as the people on the ground in individual countries to work out now with our leaders, quite frankly, what we will accept and not accept. And we can all speculate what's going on. Maybe the seeds are already there. I mean, we live in a country where we benefit from the BRICS, possibly, because Brazil doesn't really overall benefit too much with European and American business already. It does to a point, but I won't say it really enhances our lives. Whereas probably the BRIC agreements, which is more central to what we need and more relationship with South Africa, who we relate to, and we relate to better. Russia and Brazil are probably very similar countries in many, many ways. Size, I won't say attitude, but yeah. And the Brazilians like a freer way of working, which is going to be interesting how they work with the Chinese. I mean, the Chinese have a lot of interest already in Brazil. We both know that. I have to do lessons where I explain to people how to understand Chinese speaking English. So I've written a specific lesson with that. Yeah. Thank you, Jackie Chan, for giving me a lot of references. It is a very interesting times. And yes, and with China and Cuba, again, they put conventional force base in Cuba. They're not missiles yet. I think we're getting back to the conventional forces on the doorstep. And again, a rather interesting thing, which I think JFK Jr., I think he touched upon it. Someone did, and I probably have to do a lot of corrections next week, knowing this. But it is certainly interesting. Anyway, with a minute to go, is there anything you'd like to add, Steve? Have I covered everything, or?
No, it'd be fun editing these for the smaller parts, because we did 2 blocks of one just me and then another block of just you. But hey, that's the way it goes.
Yeah, it was interesting. Yeah. So
hopefully the people will have realised that there's a little extra light shining in my face today, because after receiving some comments that I was in the dark, I was in the shadows.
Yeah.
I invested in a little light here just to shine in my face.
You've seen the light.
I've seen the light, and I'm more illuminated now.
Yeah.
Feel like I've been interrogated.
Yeah, maybe we'll try that next week. Okay. Yeah. What do you think, Steve? Anyway, I'll wrap up now. I'll say thank you for listening. Thank you, Steve. And we hope to see you again in the future. Okay. Goodbye. If you enjoyed this discussion, can you please like, subscribe, and share it? Thank you.